today's episode of the Road to Cinema podcast, we'll take a look inside the documentary Hal, about the life and career of Oscar-winning filmmaker Hal Ashby, which premieres at this year's Sundance Film Festival and directed by our guest, Amy Scott. Hal Ashby is the filmmaker behind such 1970s classics as The Landlord, Being There, Harold and Maude, Shampoo, Bound for Glory, and Coming Home. The documentary takes a unique approach inside Hal Ashby's life and career by going through personal journal entries, which are read through the voice of Ben Foster playing Hal Ashby, as well as rare photos and audio from Hal Ashby's archive, and never-before-seen interviews with Jane Fonda, Jon Voight, as well as cinematographer Caleb Deschanel and editor Robert Jones, who also served as the uncredited screenwriter on Being There. For more information on the Road to Cinema podcast, please visit jogroadproductions.com. You can visit and like our Jog Road Productions Facebook page. You can follow us on Twitter at JogRoad, Instagram at JogRoad Productions. Subscribe to the Jog Road Productions YouTube channel to watch our video interviews with Don Cheadle, Greta Gerwig, and Ewan McGregor, among many others. And don't forget to subscribe to the Road to Cinema podcast on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. And you can also write us a nice review under the Road to Cinema podcast on Apple Podcasts and iTunes. And now we join director and editor Amy Scott of the new documentary Hal, which premieres this week at the Sundance Film Festival. So I thought we could start off by talking about your career as an editor, because for many years before you directed Hal, you were working pretty much full-time as an editor. Is that right?
Yeah, I lived in Chicago for about 10 years prior to moving to Los Angeles, and I started off doing like retail work and then jumped ship and started editing smaller projects. The first film that I got a full editing credit on was a film called Nice Bombs, and it was about the Iraq War. It's directed by a phenomenal filmmaker, Usama Al-Shaibi, and I think I learned a lot from Usama, and it took my editing career sort of in a more social issue driven direction, and worked a lot with the Kendling Group and Kartemquin that did like Hoop Dream. I mean,
that was Steve James' company.
Yeah, right? Yeah. He's one of their directors. Steve James and Gordon Quinn, and I actually never edited like a full Kartemquin film, but in Chicago, you all sort of work on each other's projects all the time. And I worked with Bill Siegel, who did the Trials of Muhammad Ali. So it was a long time of those kinds of documentaries. And then I moved to Los Angeles, and everything changed. Content changed.
When you moved out here, what was your goal, to stay in documentary, or were you looking to branch off?
I honestly was just looking to get to the warm weather, and thought that whichever way the wind blew at that point, I would follow. Yeah. So I continued to do documentary work. I cut a PBS short, or like a half-hour special, with Shira Piven, and it was covering the life of Wayne Kramer from the MC5, sort of focused on his philanthropic endeavors with Jail Guitar Doors. That was awesome. And I worked a lot with Wondrous, which is Jesse Dillon's company, and they do sort of the same sort of short-form, it's almost like documentary content, global social justice causes. So I think I've stayed in, relatively speaking, in that area, and then occasionally have cut like a random comedy or something along the way.
So at what point did you realize that you wanted to direct a feature? Had that always been in your mind through the years editing?
It has, yeah. Really early on in Chicago, I shot. I'm hesitant to say that I directed, even, because I had no idea what I was doing. But I did make a short film early on in my career as a director, and that followed 3 transgender male to female women as they fought to pass anti-discrimination legislation in Illinois. I mean, 10 years ago it would be a different story, and everyone would be on board. But at the time, it wasn't as chic of a topic, and so it was really I learned a lot on that film. But I knew I wanted to direct, and I knew I would come back and I would know what I was doing and not shoot on 10 different cameras, 140 hours, and try to cut it myself.
So how did your attention go to Hal Ashby? Had that been a filmmaker that had been an influence on you for a while?
Yeah, I think I always had sort of a quasi-obsession with 70s filmmakers, just the aesthetic of the sort of personal, narrative, intimate stories that 70s filmmakers made. But on top of that, just the lighting and the minimalist music, and the film stock in the 70s was gorgeous. So
like a naturalism to everything that
completely,
you would see.
Definitely. I mean, like Gordon Willis, like there's so many Caleb Deschanel and Haskell Wexler, all those guys. They knew how to shoot naturally and minimally, and so I always studied that kind of filmmaking, and really just found myself in love with that era. I think I first wanted to make a film about John Cassavetes, and then quickly realized that had already been done. There was 2 other docs on him that were also, great films. And then I read Nick Dawson's book, Being Hal Ashby. It was like in 2012.
That's a great book.
Yeah, you have read it. Yeah, it's great. So after that, I just sort of did a lot of thinking about Hal and his life story, and I couldn't put it away. I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's one of those things you're like compelled to do. So, and I was thinking back on the genesis of the project. For me, I was pretty pregnant with my first child.
What year did you begin? Because there was a Kickstarter campaign at one point. So what was sort of the first year?
First year, I was noticing on my Vimeo account, it's like for the Ashby movie, it's like 2012. So I must have read the book then, got in touch with Nick, and I think I convinced the estate that they should let me make a film about him when I was really pregnant in 2013, which is kind of funny when I think about it now. Like they would even entertain the idea of like, I hadn't done anything before. I just sort of rolled in their office out in the valley and was like, I'm going to make this movie.
So was that sort of showing them like past material, even like the
I didn't have any, I showed him, I didn't have anything really legitimate. Like if I were them, I would have been like, I don't know, kid, go make something and come back. So, but I had to, I had some editing work to show them. But I guess apparently the passion, worked, worked in my favor. And on top of that, I think I was just persistent enough that I didn't go away. And they said, all right, let's let her make the movie. So I did. And I found my crew and my production partners who have been invaluable. And we started the Kickstarter, in 2014 and raised money for production and kind of went from there. But it's been a marathon. It's not a sprint by any means.
So at the early stages of thinking about making a documentary about Hal Ashby, how did the execution and concept change over time? Or was it sort of the exact concept you had in mind at the very beginning?
Oh, God, no. I mean, I think if there's one word that could sum up my personal journey, it's naive. I was naive about how I thought it would go, the structure, when we would finish, what kind of story we were going to tell. Because there's a million ways you can, you can make a straight biopic. You can make there's a certain sort of formulaic way you could do that. Or you can just explore his films and follow that chronologically. Or you can, there's many layers that you can distill, and it was a snake on its tail for me in terms of finding the story that I really wanted to tell about his life. So that shifted in post significantly in the last 3 years. It's hard to say. I think I started off thinking, I can film interviews with everyone he ever worked with, and I can have the personal story and the films. And it was just a giant idea that, maybe it would work for a 4-part series, but it was hard to sell people on that idea. So when you start to distill it down, by design, it's reductive. So you've got to find, and what changed for me is when we had done several edits of the film. I think we were at like a 2-hour cut last year. And then we discovered all these AFI audio recordings of Hal talking. I mean, hours and hours. It spanned most of his career. So at that point, we had to throw the movie away and start over, essentially.
Had you been using the letters that
we had been using the letters? Yeah, the letters we had the entire time, but then his actual voice kicked in, and at that point I was like, well, guys. So then
you had the opportunity to use his authentic voice within there.
Yeah, and so and that changed things. So I was like, well, let him tell the story. So then it was a process of like deleting. At least for the most part, I can say I was nailing the same things that he was talking about. So that was reaffirming. But yeah, it was also at the same time like, oh man, this is never ending. I truly thought this is never going to end. We're going to keep finding things and finding things. So
it's sort of like finding so many options based on materials that you find and just other creative ideas you can have.
Totally.
Really shift things.
Totally. And then when you unearth that stuff, it will you start to reconsider the scene that you cut around it and go, oh man, that changes the direction of what we're trying to say with the scene. So now we got to go back and really re-examine this section if it's a strong enough archival bit, which we had a lot. And there's a lot that we couldn't put in, so that we found.
Well, what was really surprising for me was how candid you were about Hal Ashby and his thoughts. And, sometimes in films like this, it can be just sort of like a glossy image of what the person is. But for you, it was a really full portrait of him. Was there ever any pushback, or you sort of had full control of how to portray him?
Yeah, I think there's always pushback because I wasn't there. I mean, I was like 12 when he died, so I didn't know him. My connection came later in life. But then when you start, speaking to people that knew him intimately and they have their idea of his story, and it's like the Rashomon effect, like somewhere in there lies the truth, and we have to sort of sit up on top and try to look at everything and distill it. So yes, we did. Look, it makes him a more dynamic person. He has depth. He's human. He made bad decisions. He was flawed, but that contributed to his films. I mean, it played right into the movies that he made, and I think there's a line in the film where he says he tries not to caricaturize, not to make his subjects a caricature, because they're human, and I think that we try to do the same thing. He was imperfect, but it lended itself to a more interesting story.
What was really interesting was that Hal liked to communicate through letters. I think there was even an interview in the film where someone talks about how he preferred letters over talking on the phone.
Yeah.
So some person who could be down the street that he could easily call or see in person, he would rather just write a letter. I was wondering sort of what do you think employed him to do that?
That's a personality thing right there. And all I can say is when you're in an edit bay for hours and days and months on end, as he said at one point, he didn't leave for 7 months. That's a personality trait that you like to hold up, and you like to transmit signals out into the world, and that it's not exactly a two-way. I don't know how he would deal with things the way they are right now with just constant communication and back and forth, I guess.
Emails and text messages.
Yeah, I mean, although he probably would be a fantastic emailer, because those letters were hilarious. I mean, they were ridiculous. The things that he would say to studio heads, I couldn't believe it. It's like, my God, this is who would write the head of Paramount this letter? Like, you didn't care. The art was like, so important to him that he had to do it. Yeah. Felt compelled to, I guess.
It was interesting too how he started his career as an editor. He won an Oscar for editing The Heat of the Night and transitioned into directing, but he never really let go of the editing component of what, how he worked.
I don't know how you could. I mean, if you know how to. We have an amazing assistant editor, and I was joking with my producing partner. We all like sit in a tiny room, and we all know how to edit, and someone else is working the keys, and you're like, God, wait, no, hold on, move over. Let me show you real quick how to, this is what I'm trying to say. But I don't think when I was listening to hours and hours of his footage, there was parts where he talked about his editing process, with his editors later, and he would give them full like their alone time to make their first pass of the film, which is super rare. I mean, it's very rare today, but to have say, okay, yeah, you guys go ahead and you cut that first edit, and then I'll come in later and, check it out and we'll talk. But that's kind of like, it's kind of nuts that he did that, he gave him that kind of power and sort of trusted.
And you wouldn't really think that from sort of his personality and the control that he exerted so much.
Yeah, but I think for as controlling as he was about the finality of the project, I think he was equally dedicated to collaboration. Yeah, not compromise, as we learn later in the film. Collaboration with his crew. So, like with Haskell and Haskell, they're like behind schedule and over budget and Bound for Glory, and Haskell's like, I want to try this crazy shot. And he's like, all right, try it. Like, that's kind of bonkers. I don't know if that would happen today.
Well, it's interesting, like thematically, if you look at through The Landlord and Harold and Maude, Last Detail, Shampoo, all the way down to Bound for Glory and Being There, all of the films they made through the 70s, thematically they're similar, but yet the characters are all very, very different. Mm-hmm. So what do you think that Hal was really looking for when he was choosing films at that time?
It's an interesting question. The characters are different, but they are all single men searching for something. So I did notice that, if you look at every single one of them, even up to, Chauncey Gardner, they're all on a journey.
Or even sort of isolated.
They're an isolated figure, an isolated man. Except, I guess, with the exception of Bud, he was a younger man. But they're all looking for something, and they're up against they're fighting something, within themselves, or something issue-driven, I guess. There's an author in England that just wrote a book. I can't think of the name of it, but it's basically asked the question of, is Hal Ashby an auteur? Because he made these films that were all, you can't really categorize them. It's not like, oh, he made those kinds of movies, or there was there's not an Ashby style per se.
He didn't write the screenplay per se.
No. But each of the films they're unique. And I think that he really went for the heart of the story. And if the heart of the story was, something that was really great, then he made that. I mean, but he worked with, like Robert Towne on so many of these projects, and Bob Jones. So I think it was like assembling the right group of artists and then making the best possible film you could make.
And it seems like his process was really organic with how he worked with the actors and the rest of the crew. I mean, I was even surprised to learn that a lot of Coming Home was improvised. They didn't even have a script throughout the production.
Isn't that crazy?
And you watch the movie and it feels like there's a complete structure there, but then to hear that is like really shocking.
No, we thought that was really funny. In that there was no script. I mean, everyone we interviewed was like, yeah, no, it was total chaos. We didn't know what we were doing. We would, we would all sit in a room together with tape recorders, and we'd come up with these lines, or, I don't know, we'd rehearse it day of, morning of, moment before we turned the cameras on. But then they go and they win an Academy, and then they killed it at the Academy Awards that year. Just crazy.
Yeah.
Like, you guys were winging it, totally winging it. But I mean, I guess the structure, when the structure's in place and the structure's good and you're comfortable with the artists on board. So he gave them the latitude to do that. And it worked.
Yeah.
Almost every time. Until it didn't. And then it really didn't.
Well, I was wondering, the last shot of Being There, was that improvised where he puts the umbrella? I think that was when Peter Sellers put the umbrella in the water. And
they did a couple of different endings in Hal's recordings. He describes they had shot where Chauncey's just sort of, the first ending, I think he's just sort of walks away into the forest, and he's milling about in the trees, and Shirley MacLaine's like, well, that's, la-di-da kind of a moment. But, and then he was talking to the author, Rudy Wurlitzer, and was just kind of going over this, and Rudy's like, what are you going to do? And they just kind of came up with this idea. And it's not in our film, but Jeff Bridges told it was funny. He just relayed it. And Hal told him the story of it, and he was like, Jeff said that they were like, get that plexiglass and get it over there, throw it in the water, and let's shoot it. And the studios were like, what in the world is this ending? It wasn't in the script, They just went rogue, which is crazy to me that you would have this masterpiece, and you are beholden to some extent, to the studio. Like, here's the script that we're going to shoot with your money. And then you're like, we decided not to go with that ending. That's insane.
And it changes the whole conception of how you viewed the film.
Completely. Yeah. You had to go back and you're like, wait, what is he trying to say here? And you could think about it forever. So that's what makes it a perfect film. So.
Yeah. Well, I was curious. Watching the documentary, we see all these filmmakers who were influenced by Ashby: David O. Russell, Alexander Payne, Judd Apatow, Adam McKay. Mm-hmm. Was that surprising to you at all? Sort of how many filmmakers out there were really immersed in his work, and they can see it sort of in their own work? No,
it was not surprising. Because I can see it in so many contemporary films today. I can feel like it's a crazy wide shot, like there's some things that are so quintessentially Hal Ashby. When you see them, it's really easily recognizable. In a way, not to say anyone rips anybody off, but as in the grand scheme of things, but flattery is so I wasn't surprised, and so it was easy.
Ripping off is the sincerest form of flattery.
Exactly, yeah. So yeah, and not to say they rip things off, but we didn't get Wes Anderson because I think that guy is just constantly filmmaking. I don't know if he ever takes a break, but I would have liked to have talked to him too. There's sometimes you see shots or like there's a musical moment and you're like, that is so Hal Ashby right there. It's hard to put your finger on it, but it's like it's a shot or it's time between characters or interpersonal dialogue. And it feels really reminiscent. Yeah. So then when we would ask these directors, early on I had an idea of like, we'll have one person do a case study of all these films, and that was my pitch. So like with Judd Apatow, for example, I think we had him do The Last Detail. I think. Anyway, we went in thinking...
So sort of each filmmaker...
Yeah, it's like Adam McKay. I was like, I want you to talk about being there, because I knew he had just done, the financial crisis movie, and I was like, Adam would be great for that. But with every one of those directors, once we got in there and started talking with them, they were like, oh, yeah. I love this movie, but there's also these moments of this other movie. And so they kind of like would jump around. And so that was exciting. I was like, I don't know if this works, having one person just do one movie, because they said really wonderful things, about all the films. So we went from there. But it was nice. They were so excited, and our excitement and their excitement sort of fed off each other.
Well, it was interesting in terms of music, because now we see so many modern filmmakers use songs as part of the sort of Wes Anderson, David O. Russell.
Yeah.
They'll all implement a song we love from the Rolling Stones or from the Beatles. And Hal Ashby was doing that in many of his films, Rolling Stones, or he had Cat Stevens write original music.
Right.
So he was really, in Shampoo had Beach Boys. So is that something that Hal Ashby was really into, using sort of contemporary music, or just using a song and really putting it, immersing it into the movie? I
think that he, and at least all the research that we did and talking to people, I just think he was that kind of a guy that always had he was always sort of leading the zeitgeist. Like, he knew what was going on precisely and during his time, whatever time that was. And so, we found correspondence that Neil Young was supposed to do the soundtrack for The Landlord.
Really?
Yeah, and I guess maybe they did or didn't record a bulk of material, and then for whatever legal reasons it didn't happen. But that was that's like 1970, so I was like, wow, that would have been like, what Neil record would have been? It's kind of crazy to think about that. And then it was going to be, I think Elton John was going to be cast as Bud Cort in Harold and Maude, and then he started listening to Cat Stevens music right before Cat Stevens really kind of blew up. It's like he knew these things were happening. He wanted to work with Leon Russell at one point. He was definitely on board. The soundtrack to Shampoo is like insane. The fact that they could throw all those songs on, and it makes me wonder, like, it must be why Shampoo hasn't been reissued right now.
Even like Sergeant Pepper was in there too. From
Oh
the
yeah,
Beatles.
Sergeant Pepper,
everything.
like Jimi Hendrix, like it's wall to wall, unlicensable material. Like, how did they pull that off?
That would be like the budget of a full movie.
Yeah,
today.
I mean, and then the big movie. So I think that's when we were hunting down all of our, like, why hasn't Criterion put this out? I was like, oh, well, that's probably why. You can't do that anymore unless you're David O. Russell. David has like he puts picture to music with insect-like precision. I mean, what he does is breathtaking to me. And so, yeah, that's what we did talk to David about music. So there was just so much that we could talk about. It was really difficult to distill it all down.
Yeah, that must be sort of a challenge, sort of having so much information, so many themes to cover, but you really have to kind of narrow it in.
Yeah, it was just finding our story. Because I was like, we could just make a film about filmmaking. Like, it sort of became that. And I do think that's one of the parallel narratives that runs through our film. Is like, this is a film about filmmaking. This is the craft. This is the highs and the lows, and what happens when your film gets taken away from you, because that will happen. At some point. So.
But I think what's great is that you mixed the personality of the filmmaker with the films, with analyzing the films, which is very unique for this type of project.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like, there was a self-reflective nature. I just started after a while. I mean, it's been 5 years. So I have watched these movies over and over and over. And so different things would emerge, like, that is part of his life. So I started to really be able to pull out, like, oh, that really happened. Or this is I mean, you can go like way too far and way too literal with things and go, is this supposed to be this period in Hal Ashby's life?
Like a direct connection.
Yeah, and so we wanted to shy away from that. But I mean, I do think there's direct parallels that he did. He did put himself in his films in some way, or he did quite literally in some shots. But I mean, I think symbolically he was in there.
Well, you talked about sort of the film evolving for you over this long period of years. Did you have like sort of like a master written document of how you saw things going, or what was sort of your organizational process with so much archival material and interviews that you had to work with?
Oh man, I think I've always had a treatment that I tried to stick to, but that just goes out the window. Like I said, my crew and my producers and my collaborators are all just equally passionate and creative and intelligent, and so it's been fun. Like we've had a lot of long conversations about process and just like I said, like what story we're going to tell. And then sometimes somebody would come, like bring this totally new concept to the table, and we like pick that apart for a couple of months. It's kind of been crazy.
And I was curious too, I mean, Ben Foster, his performance in this is excellent. To hear his voice bring to life those letters. At what point did he come on, and what was his take on Hal Ashby upon reading those?
Oh, well, he loved him. I mean, I think if you've seen Ben Foster's work, you can go, okay, like he gets it. He gets the letters, because those letters they're crazy. I mean, in a good way, but sometimes in a bad way too. I just think it takes a special person to really be able to pull out the tone of what Hal was trying to say. And I've always been a fan of Ben's work. But he came on late in the game because we needed to have crystal clear vision about what letters we wanted to include and how we wanted to use them. And I didn't want to waste anybody's time. So my producer, Brian Morrow, he did the voiceover for the whole time. So I was always cutting to Brian's voice. And then he was my guide. Yeah. I got really used to it. And so we were all like, wow, now we have Ben in the movie, and it's finally here. Like we can feel it now. So yeah, Ben was incredible. He's on a different level, that guy.
Yeah, that was an excellent performance you gave in the film.
Yeah.
The later period of Hal's life has always fascinated me, and there's so much mystery around it. He had this huge success in the 70s, and then it sort of dipped after being there. What was sort of your take on what happened after being there?
Well, I mean, what we try to explain or not explain, because we can't, but what we try to examine in the third act of our film is that question. It's like, what happened? Because I didn't know what happened to him, and I was a big fan. But I was like, God, what happened after being there? Did he stop making movies? Did he move to Europe or what? And I think it was the perfect storm of the studios. It's the way that the end of the 70s happened with those kinds of films. I mean, when everything sort of went corporate and the companies became conglomerates, you are not going to get the same sort of financing, but the respect for these sort of smaller, personal-driven narratives, they're non-existent. And so if you're not making Jaws or Star Wars, and not to say that those weren't great films too, I love those films, but it's a different kind of a movie, and I don't know if Ashby was able to pull that off. He certainly was trying. He had tons of scripts that he was working through and trying to, get these things made. And maybe that was part of the problem. Maybe he was working too fast, But the companies that he worked for, like the studios, Lorimar wouldn't release him to direct Tootsie. And I feel like Tootsie would have really been that would have put him in it would have been a perfect follow-up for being there. And it didn't happen. They took it away from him, and then they took $8 million away from him. Yeah. So it's when you can't fully realize your vision, what do you have left? And
it sort of continued to weigh him down. That's
completely.
What I saw in the film.
Because it was, that's who he was. That's what we learned about him, was that his art came before everything else. And when they took it away, it was the end. And then it was literally the end.
Yeah, well, so it's excellent in the film, the eulogy or the memorial service that you have, Warren Beatty and Bud Cort and so many people who worked with him. I thought that footage really worked so well in encapsulating the whole film in a way.
Yeah, thanks. That was we didn't know what to do with that footage. We were kicking it around for years. Like, how do we do this? Do we just have it at the end or take it through the movie? I don't know. But there were so many people that spoke at that memorial that we couldn't use in the movie, or we just ran out of time. But I'm pretty sure Sean Penn stole a street sign, like an Ashby street sign, and drug it into the
and he brought
DG.
it.
Yeah, he brought it. And
wow.
so there's a shot of it. Jeff Bridges is at the podium, and it's like, it's crazy. But that's sad, because I guess for all intents and purposes, that was his funeral. That was his memorial. So that was it. Okay. It's pretty powerful footage.
Yeah. And now you're premiering at Sundance coming up.
We are.
Are you excited about that?
I'm very excited. Yeah, to put it mildly. I've been there. I was there once before with the director, Tim Ratilli. He made a really great film called All My Friends Are Funeral Singers. And so I just kind of was like helping out, editing random things for him. And so I got to kind of check out the madness of the festival, and it was formidable. Wow. So I'm really excited. I think that this film is, I think it's perfect for, I hope that everybody will watch it, but I know that film lovers are really going to dig it. So it's exciting to me to be able to bring it there to people that will take it and really listen, pay attention, and not just his story, but sort of the more craft-oriented parts of the film. I think it'll resonate there. So we're really excited.
Yeah, I thought it was excellent how you did immerse sort of Hal's personal filmmaking style throughout the entire project, which is incredible.
His filmmaking style in terms of?
Well, how he liked to edit, how he saw sort of, through those AFI lectures.
Definitely. Yeah, he never stopped. I mean, he never stopped until he had to. So.
And do you guys have distribution at this moment?
Not at the moment, but I guess it's all systems forward. So we're really excited. I'd like it to play everywhere. And, I'm from Oklahoma, so I'd like my family and friends to watch it and be able to get something out of it there, not just in film-centric communities.
Thanks for listening to the Road to Cinema podcast. We'll see you next time.